Hey, my beautiful cynics, welcome back to the channel. It is our today's story. Oh, it is a delicious, aged vintage of betrayal and rebirth. We've got a greedy stepsister who thinks she can steal a throne just by stealing a man, and our girl Elena, who realizes the best revenge isn't fighting over a useless guy, it is letting the trash take itself out. Let's dive right into this glorious, messy masterpiece. The icy, suffocating grip of the Atlantic Ocean, the deafening roar of the yacht propellers. The last thing I saw before the crushing darkness took me was my stepsister, Mia, standing on the deck in her pristine couture, laughing as I was dragged under. You re nothing but a motherless stray, Elena. Why should you get the power? It's mine now, I gasped, my eyes snapping open. There was no ocean, no blood, no propellers. I was sitting in the velvet armchair of the Thorne family estate. Before I could even process the impossible reality that I was breathing, a shrill, desperate voice shattered the silence. I am marrying Conrad Vance, mother. I don't care what you say, he is the one. I froze. My gaze darted to the center of the room. There stood Mia, her face flushed with a terrifying mix of greed and absolute certainty. My heart pounded against my ribs, a slow, dark smile creeping into my mind. Conrad Vance, the broke, disgraced former military officer currently running a failing local campaign. The man whose severely ill mother required round-the-clock care. In our past life, Mia had thrown a tantrum to marry Damien Sinclair, the billionaire heir, leaving me to be pawned off to Conrad. I had spent 10 agonizing years clawing my way up from the dirt. I wiped his mother's drool, wrote his political speeches, covered up his violent outbursts, and masterminded the ruthless PR campaigns that eventually crowned him a state senator. I built his empire with my own blood, only for him to hand the keys to Mia. And now, Mia was demanding the penniless politician. She remembers, she had been reborn too. She thought she could just skip the 10 years of grueling labor and step right into the role of a senator's wife. Valerie, my stepmother, hissed, her manicured hands trembling as she grabbed Mia's shoulders. Conrad is practically bankrupt. His campaign is a joke, and his mother is a vegetable. You'll be nothing but a glorified nursemaid. You are going to marry Damien Sinclair, and that is final. Mia shoved her mother's hands away, leaning in to whisper furiously. I couldn't hear the exact words, but I saw Valerie's eyes widen. Mia was likely feeding her some fabricated premonition about Conrad's inevitable rise to power. Valerie's face tightened. She shot a calculating, venomous glance in my direction. Elena. Valerie's voice dropped an octave, dripping with fake maternal warmth as she walked over to me. You know, Ivy always treated you like my own. Lie. The Sinclair family has offered a marriage alliance, Valerie continued, her eyes searching my face for any sign of resistance. Damien Sinclair, he's incredibly wealthy. You will never have to worry about money again. It's a golden ticket, Elena, but let's be clear. Once you marry him, you are a Sinclair. She was terrified I would come crawling back when Damien inevitably self-destructed. In my past life, Damien had died in a horrific motorcycle crash just months after his wedding to Mia. I kept my face perfectly blank, though I was laughing hysterically inside. Throw me into the billionaire's graveyard gladly. I'll do it, I said, my voice eerily calm. Valerie exhaled a sharp breath of relief, but I immediately stood up, towering over her slightly. On one condition, I added, my tone turning to ice. I am not walking into the Sinclair empire empty-handed to be treated like a beggar. Before I sign that marriage certificate, I want the full release of my biological mother's trust fund today. Valerie's jaw clenched, the greedy facade cracking. That money is locked. Then Mia can marry the playboy with a death wish, and I'll take the bankrupt politician, I interrupted, crossing my arms. Your choice, Valerie. My mother's money, or your precious daughter's future. Girl, yes, I always tell you ladies, never walk into a marriage empty-handed, especially not an arranged one. Valerie thought she was throwing Elena to the wolves. But Elena was just using the chaos to secure her bag. A billionaire husband is a wild card, but liquid assets, that's your actual soulmate. Mia is playing checkers over a broke guy, while Elena is playing 4D chess to get her trust fund back. Love fades, but financial independence is forever. Honey, Mia panicked, grabbing Valerie's arm. Give it to her, Mom. Just give it to her. Valerie's eye twitched violently. She practically tore the release papers from her desk drawer, signing them with enough force to snap the pen. Take it, she spat. But remember this, Elena. You are dead to us. When Damien ruins his life, do not come crying to my door. I picked up the documents, the weight of my first victory grounding me. Don't worry, Valerie. You couldn't afford me anyway. 3 days later, the Sinclair penthouse, Manhattan. There was no grand reception for me. Damien Sinclair had made it abundantly clear that this was a business transaction forced upon him by his parents. The heavy mahogany doors of the penthouse slammed shut. Damien stood in the foyer, his tie already undone, a leather duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He didn't even look at me. The master bedroom is yours. The black card on the counter has no limit, Damien said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone of pure indifference. Don't wait up. I won't be back. Before his hand could even touch the doorknob, a sharp, authoritative voice echoed from the hallway. You will not walk out that door, Damien. Eleanor Sinclair, my new mother-in-law, stepped into the light. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow. She had a known history of severe cardiac issues. Damien scoffed, not turning around. Stop the theatrics, Mother. I married the girl. You got your PR win. Now let me live my life. You arrogant, Eleanor gasped, clutching her chest. Her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed onto the marble floor with a sickening thud. Mom! Damien dropped his bag, the Playboy facade instantly shattering into raw, unadulterated panic. He dropped to his knees, his hands hovering uselessly over her. Mom, hey, wake up! Someone call an ambulance! He was frozen, a billionaire heir utterly powerless. Move! I barked, shoving him aside with a force that surprised him. I dropped to the floor, my fingers instantly finding the carotid artery. Nothing. I didn't hesitate. I tore open the collar of Eleanor's blouse and began chest compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. What the hell are you doing? Damien yelled, his face pale as a ghost. Saving her life. Call 911 and tell them it is a sudden cardiac arrest. You idiot! Before Valerie had forced me to drop out to serve the Thorne family, I was top of my class in emergency medicine. I knew exactly what I was doing. Minutes felt like hours. Damien was on the phone, his voice shaking, his eyes entirely fixed on my bloodless, focused face. Finally, with a violent, her eyes fluttered open, disoriented and terrified, I slumped back onto my heels, wiping a bead of sweat from my forehead. Just as the penthouse doors burst open and the paramedics rushed in, they loaded Eleanor onto the stretcher. As they rolled her out, the lead medic paused, looking at me. You kept the blood flowing to her brain. You saved her life, ma'am. The doors clicked shut, leaving a suffocating silence in the massive penthouse. Damien stood by the window, his chest heaving. He slowly turned to look at me. The disdain in his eyes was gone, replaced by a dark, piercing scrutiny. Who exactly are you? He murmured, his voice tight. The Thorne family said you were just a quiet, useless girl. I stood up, smoothing out the wrinkles in my skirt. I walked slowly toward him, closing the distance, until I was looking directly into his eyes. I am the woman who just saved your mother, I said softly, my voice carrying a lethal edge. "And if you want to keep your family's empire from crumbling, you are going to listen to me." Damien's jaw set, his pride wounded. He leaned in, his imposing frame casting a shadow over me. "Don't think you own me just because you played doctor, Elena. I don't take orders from anyone." I didn't back down an inch. Instead, a cold, knowing smile touched my lips. "I don't own you, Damien," I whispered, my eyes locking onto his, "but I do know that if you get on your motorcycle this Friday night for that race, you are going to die. And I refuse to be a widow in my first week of marriage." Damien's breath hitched. The micro-expression of pure shock rippled across his face. No one knew about the underground race on Friday. No one. So, I stepped back, my eyes flashing with a dangerous light. "Are you going to stay, or do I need to start picking out your coffin?" The silence in the penthouse was so thick, it felt like it could shatter glass. Damien stared at me, the arrogant playboy facade completely stripped away, leaving only raw, unfiltered shock. His jaw tightened as he took a slow step toward me, his towering frame casting a long shadow. "Who told you about the race?" he demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous gravelly whisper. "That track is strictly underground. No one knows I am riding tonight." I didn't flinch. I held his gaze, my expression as unreadable as carved marble. "I know a lot of things, Damien," I said, my voice perfectly level. "I know you push the hairpin turn on the West Side Highway at 140 miles an hour. I know you do it because you re-suffocating under the weight of the Sinclair empire, and you re-looking for a way out." I took a step closer. "But you are not going to find your exit in a body bag. Not while I am tied to your name." Damien's breath hitched. For a second, I saw a flicker of genuine vulnerability in his eyes, the lonely, terrified air trapped in a golden cage. But he quickly masked it with a dark scowl. "You are psychotic," he muttered, though the absolute certainty in his voice wavered. "Call me whatever makes you sleep at night," I replied, turning my back on him with deliberate dismissal. "But if you walk out that door tonight, you will not come back alive. Your choice." Let's pause and take notes. This is exactly how you handle an ego-driven alpha male. No tears, no desperate begging, just a stone-cold reality check and a dramatic exit. Damien is used to women fawning over his wealth, but Elena basically says, "Go ahead and die if you want. Just don't ruin my aesthetic as a new bride." Men are obsessed with women who don't need them. She didn't just save his life. Master class. Ha! I didn't wait for his I walked into the master bedroom and shut the door. For 10 agonizing minutes, I listened to the heavy silence from the living room. Then, finally, I heard the sharp clatter of his motorcycle keys being thrown onto the marble kitchen island. A cold, satisfied smile touched across town in the cramped, suffocatingly stale air of the Vance family, Queen's townhouse. Mia was living a very different Friday night. "Mia, where is my tea? It's freezing in here." The shrill, grating voice of Agnes Vance, Conrad's mother, echoed from the second-floor bedroom. Mia stood in the narrow, outdated kitchen, staring at the grime-covered stove in absolute disgust. Her hands, previously only used to holding champagne flutes, were raw from scrubbing. She threw the dirty dish towel onto the counter, her chest heaving with silent rage. "This isn't right," she thought frantically, biting her lip until it bled. In the past life, Elena lived in a mansion. Conrad had maids. He was a senator. What mere shallow! I had scrubbed these very floors. I had endured Agnes' verbal abuse while secretly trading stocks to fund Conrad's first local campaign. I built the throne Mia thought she could just sit on. The front door unlocked, and Conrad walked in. His suit was cheap, his tie loosened, and his face was twisted in a dark, exhausted scowl. His campaign for city council was bleeding money, and his poll numbers were abysmal. "Conrad!" Mia rushed to him, forcing a sweet, desperate smile. "You are home! Listen, don't worry about the campaign. I promise you. Our luck is about to change. By tomorrow morning, everything will be different." She was waiting for midnight, waiting for the breaking news of Damien Sinclair's fatal motorcycle crash. Once Damien was dead, she assumed Elena would be thrown out onto the streets, penniless and cursed as a black widow. Conrad didn't smile back. He looked at the empty dining table, then at Mia's pristine, unbothered posture. His eyes darkened with a chilling cruelty. "My mother is screaming upstairs. The house smells like a sewer, and there's no food on the table," Conrad said, his voice dangerously low. He grabbed Mia's arm, his grip tight enough to bruise. "I didn't marry you so you could play psychic, Mia. I married you because your mother promised me campaign funding that hasn't arrived. So unless you are hiding a check in that dress, go upstairs and wash my mother." Mia gasped, tears of humiliation springing to her eyes as he shoved her toward the stairs. You can't treat me like this. I am going to be a senator's wife." Conrad let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "Senator, I can't even afford to keep the lights on next month. Start cleaning, Mia, or get out." Mia stumbled up the stairs, her heart pounding with toxic, venomous hope. "Just wait," she told herself, clutching the banister. "Just wait until midnight. Elena will be a ruined widow. I will have the last laugh." 11:45 p.m. The Sinclair penthouse. I was sitting in the dimly lit study, reviewing the Sinclair Corporation's quarterly financials, when the sharp ring of Damien's cell phone shattered the quiet. Damien, who had been pacing the living room like a caged animal for the last 3 hours, snatched the phone from the coffee table. "Yay," he barked. I didn't look up from my papers, but I listened intently. The voice on the other end of the line was frantic, bleeding through the speaker. Damien's posture went entirely rigid. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost under the chandelier's glow. Damien whispered, his voice cracking. "Dead, on impact." He slowly lowered the phone. The device slipped from his trembling fingers, clattering against the hardwood floor. I closed the financial folder and finally looked at him. "A massive pile-up on the West Side Highway," Damien breathed, his eyes wide, staring at me as if I were a terrifying, omniscient deity. A semi-truck ran the red light at the hairpin turn. 3 riders dead, including the guy who took my starting position. Damien's knees buckled slightly, and he caught himself against the back of the sofa. He looked at his hands, realizing that if he had walked out that door, his blood would be painting the asphalt right now. He slowly lifted his head, his gaze locking onto mine. The defiance was gone. The arrogance was eradicated. In its place was an intense, burning mix of awe, fear, and absolute submission. "You?" Damien swallowed hard, taking a slow step toward the study. "You saved my mother, and you just saved me. I refuse to be a widow now. Are you ready to stop playing the rebel teenager and start running this empire with me?" Damien didn't hesitate. "Whatever you want, Elena. Tell me what to do." Saturday morning. Mia's eyes were bloodshot. She had stayed awake all night, refreshing the news on her phone, her hands trembling with manic anticipation. Where is it? Where is the obituary? Suddenly, her screen flashed with a breaking news alert from the New York Times. Mia gasped, a twisted smile stretching across her face as she clicked the notification. But the headline didn't say billionaire heir dead. It read, "The new power couple of Wall Street. Damien Sinclair steps up as acting CEO. Photographed with new wife, Elena Thorne." Below the headline was a high-resolution paparazzi photo. It showed Damien and me stepping out of Mount Sinai Hospital. Damien wasn't looking like a reckless playboy. He was wearing a sharp, tailored suit, his hand resting fiercely and protectively on the small of my back as he shielded me from the cameras. I looked immaculate, staring down the lenses with the cold, untouchable grace of a queen. "Number," Mia choked out, dropping her phone. "No, no, no." He's supposed to be dead. She's supposed to be ruined. Before she could spiral further into her hysterical breakdown, a loud, aggressive knock pounded on the front door. Mia practically crawled to the door and yanked it open. Standing on the porch were two delivery men in black uniforms. Between them, they carried a massive, extravagant funeral wreath made of pure white lilies and black roses. It was the kind of wreath reserved for the ultra-wealthy. "Delivery for Mia Vance," the man said, his face deadpan. Mia stared at the wreath, her blood running cold as ice. Pinned to the center of the black roses was a crisp, cream-colored card with elegant gold foil lettering. Her trembling fingers reached out and opened the envelope. Inside, in my perfectly sharp handwriting, was a single sentence. "I heard you were expecting a funeral today. Better luck next time, little sister." The funeral wreath sat in the middle of Mia's cramped living room, like a rotting monument to her failure. Mia stared at the black roses, her breathing shallow and erratic. Her fingers crushed the cream-colored card until the gold foil lettering dug into her skin. "She knows." The realization hit Mia like a freight train. Elena wasn't just lucky. Elena had lived the same 10 years of grueling torment, the same bloody betrayal on the yacht, and now Elena was 10 steps ahead, wielding the Sinclair billions like a loaded gun. "What is that monstrosity?" Conrad's harsh voice snapped Mia out of her spiral. He trudged down the stairs, rubbing his temples, his eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night of reviewing abysmal poll numbers. "Nothing," Mia shrieked, kicking the wreath behind the worn-out sofa. "Just a prank from a rival campaign." Conrad didn't care enough to investigate. His jaw twitched, a clear sign of his mounting, barely suppressed rage. "Did your mother wire the funds? My media buyer is threatening to pull our television spots by noon if we don't clear the invoice. I need that 50,000. Mia's stomach plummeted. Valerie had cut them off the moment. It's clearing the bank," Mia lied, her voice trembling. "Just give it a few days. You going to be a senator, Conrad. Everyone knows you redestined for Washington," Conrad sneered, the mask of the noble military veteran slipping to reveal the ruthless opportunist underneath. "Destiny doesn't pay for airtime, Mia. If that money isn't in my account by Friday, you can pack your bags." He grabbed his coat and slammed the door behind him. Mia collapsed onto the sofa, digging her nails into her scalp. She was supposed to be sipping champagne on Capitol Hill, not begging for scraps in Queens. A toxic, desperate idea clawed its way into her mind. She needed to look the part. If the political wives saw her projecting wealth and confidence, the donations would follow. She pulled out Conrad's emergency campaign ledger. There was exactly $10,000 left, the absolute last of his donor funds, meant for his mother's medical care, and the final ad push. Without a second thought, Mia forged Conrad's signature on a blank check. 2 days later, the Pierre Hotel, Manhattan, the annual Women in Politics luncheon, was a VIP's nest of silk, pearls, and veiled insults. Mia stood near the champagne tower, her chin tilted up, desperately trying to catch the eye of the governor's wife. Wrapped around Mia's wrist was a blindingly expensive, brand-new Cartier diamond bracelet. She had drained Conrad's account for it, convinced that looking like a winner would make her one. "Did you hear?" a woman whispered nearby. "Damien Sinclair actually showed up to a board meeting yesterday, and he brought his new wife." "The Thorn girl? I thought she was just a placeholder." "Hardly. I heard she completely restructured their asset portfolio in 48 hours. She's terrifying." Mia's grip on her champagne flute tightened until her knuckles turned white. Lies. It had to be lies. Elena was just a country doctor in their past life. She only knew how to manipulate local. Suddenly, the murmurs in the room died down. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom swung open. Elena walked in. She wasn't dripping in diamonds like Mia. She wore a razor sharp, but it wasn't her clothes that commanded the room. It was the man walking half a step behind her. Damien Sinclair. The untouchable billionaire heir didn't look like a hostage to his marriage. He looked like a predator guarding his queen. His hand rested lightly on Elena's lower back, his dark eyes scanning the room with a lethal warning. Disrespect her, and I will ruin you. The governor's wife immediately abandoned her conversation. Mia felt a physical sickness rise in her throat. That was supposed to be her life. Driven by blind, irrational jealousy, Mia pushed her way through the crowd, planting herself directly in Elena's path. Enjoying the Sinclair credit cards, Elena, Mia sneered, her voice just loud enough to draw the attention of the surrounding elite. It's a shame, Damien. Money can't buy you class. We all know you only married him because you couldn't handle the pressure of real public service. Conrad is going to Washington, while your husband is just a tabloid punchline. The room went dead silent. Several women gasped at the sheer audacity. Damien's eyes darkened, a terrifying coldness settling over his features. He stepped forward to crush her, but Elena simply raised 2 fingers. Damien stopped instantly, yielding to her command. Elena looked. She didn't look angry. She looked at her stepsister the way a scientist looks at a dying insect. Washington. Elena's voice was soft, yet it carried perfectly across the silent ballroom. Conrad's latest internal polling has him at 12%. He failed to secure the sanitation union endorsement yesterday because he couldn't answer a basic question about municipal zoning. His campaign is officially bankrupt. Mia's face drained of color. You lying. You don't know anything about his campaign. I know everything. Elena stepped closer, her gaze dropping to the glittering Cartier bracelet on Mia's trembling wrist. A slow, razor-sharp smile touched Elena's lips. For instance, I know that bracelet costs exactly $9,500, which is fascinating, considering Conrad's campaign account was overdrawn by exactly that amount this morning. A collective gasp rippled through the political wives. Embezzling campaign funds was the ultimate social and legal suicide. Shut up, Mia shrieked, the facade completely shattering. You are just jealous. Conrad loves me, Mia. The voice was like a whip cracking across the room. The crowd parted. Conrad stood in the doorway. He wasn't wearing his polished politician smile. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated malice. The veins in his neck bulged against his collar. He marched across the room, ignoring the stairs, ignoring the governor's wife. He stopped right in front of Mia. Conrad, Mia whimpered, instinctively taking a step back. I bought it for the campaign to project strength, you said. Conrad didn't let her finish. His hand shot out, his fingers wrapping around Mia's wrist with a vice-like, bone-crushing grip. He yanked her arm up, the diamonds mocking his impending political ruin. Take it off, Conrad whispered. The sheer venom in his low voice made the hair on the back of Mia's neck stand up. Take it off right now, or I will break your wrist and take it off myself. You are a disgrace, Conrad spat, loud enough for the entire room to hear. He dragged her by the arm, hauling her toward the exit like a misbehaving child. You are nothing but a parasite. Mia stumbled in her heels, crying hysterically as she was dragged out of the ballroom, her dreams of being a senator's wife humiliated in front of the very people she tried to impress. Elena stood perfectly still, watching the doors swing shut behind them. Damien stepped up beside her, leaning down slightly to murmur in her ear. Brutal. Did you tip him off about the bank account? I didn't have to, Elena replied coolly, taking a sip of her champagne. Trash always finds a way to set itself on fire. Damien let out a low, dark chuckle, his eyes gleaming with profound admiration. So, what is the next move? Do we let them burn out in Queens? No, Elena set her glass down, her eyes narrowing into a dangerous, calculating glare. Conrad is desperate now, and desperate men make fatal mistakes. Book us a VIP table, at the Metropolitan Museum's charity gala next week. It's time to completely destroy them. The drive back to Queens was suffocating. Conrad gripped the steering wheel so tightly, his knuckles were stark white. He hadn't spoken a single word since dragging Mia out of the Pierre Hotel. The silence in the car was heavy, toxic, and loaded with a violence that made Mia's skin crawl. "Conrad, please," Mia finally whimpered, clutching her bruised wrist. "I was trying to help. The women at that luncheon, they only respect money. If I looked the part, they would have donated." "Shut your mouth." Conrad didn't yell. The terrifying calm in his voice made Mia instantly snap her jaw shut. He pulled the car into the driveway of the dilapidated townhouse and killed the engine. He just stared straight ahead at the peeling paint on his front door. "My mother's home nurse quit today," Conrad said, his voice completely devoid of emotion. Her check bounced. The campaign manager walked out 2 hours later. "The bank called to inform me that my accounts are frozen pending an investigation into unauthorized withdrawals." Mia shrank against the passenger door, tears spilling hot and fast down her cheeks. "I'll fix it. I'll call my mother. Valerie will send money, I swear." Conrad slowly turned his head. His eyes were completely dead, stripped of the charismatic politician facade, revealing the ruthless, self-serving predator beneath. "Your mother blocked my number yesterday," Conrad stated flatly. "You have no money, Mia. You have no connections. You are entirely useless to me." Before Mia could process the absolute finality in his tone, Conrad leaned across the console. He didn't strike her. Instead, he reached past her and popped open the passenger door. "Get inside," he ordered. "My mother soiled her bed 3 hours ago. You are going to clean her. And if I hear a single complaint, I will hand the bank records of your little shopping spree over to the district attorney." Mia let out a strangled sob, the reality of her rebirth finally crashing down on her. She had thought she was stealing a crown. Instead, she had volunteered for a prison sentence. Meanwhile, high above the squalor of Queens, the Sinclair penthouse was a fortress of absolute power. Elena sat at the head of the massive dining table. The blueprints of the Sinclair Corporation's latest commercial development spread out before her. Damien sat adjacent to her, his sleeves rolled up, listening with an intensity that would have shocked his former drinking buddies. "The zoning board is going to reject the waterfront permit," Elena said, tapping a red pen against the map. "The mayor is using it as leverage for his re-election campaign. We bypass him. We leak the environmental impact report to the press tomorrow morning. It proves the development will clean up the toxic runoff in the bay. The public pressure will force his hand." Damien stared at her, his dark eyes ablaze with a dangerous mix of respect and raw attraction. "You play dirty, Elena. I like it." "I play to win," Elena corrected, not looking up from the blueprints. "And right now, we have a pest problem to deal with." Damien leaned back in his chair, swirling a glass of scotch. "Vance, his campaign is dead in the water. Why waste the energy?" Elena finally looked up, her gaze cold and piercing. "Because Conrad Vance is a survivor. He's a parasite who latches onto whatever host can keep him alive. Right now, he's drowning, which means he's going to look for a lifeboat." She pulled a sleek black envelope from her briefcase and slid it across the table. "The Metropolitan Museum Charity Gala, the most exclusive ticket in New York." "Exactly," Elena said softly. "The room will be filled with billionaires, media moguls, and desperate politicians looking for wealthy donors. It's his last chance to secure funding before the election." "And your sister?" Damien asked, a mocking smirk playing on his lips. "Mia is terrified of losing her status," Elena replied, her eyes darkening with the memory of the yacht, the cold water, and Mia's laughing face. "She will do something incredibly stupid to prove she belongs in that room. I am counting on it." Damien took a slow sip of his scotch, his eyes never leaving hers. What's the play? We let them dig their own graves, Elena said, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. And then we bury them on live television. 5 days later, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the red carpet was a blinding storm of camera flashes and screaming paparazzi. The steps of the Met were lined with the absolute pinnacle of New York society. Elena stepped out of the black Maybach, the flashbulbs immediately exploding around her. She wasn't wearing an overly complicated gown. She wore a sleek, structural black dress that looked like armor, paired with a single, breathtaking emerald necklace, a Sinclair family heirloom that screamed insurmountable wealth. Damien stepped out behind her, his hand instantly finding its place at the small of her back. He looked like a king claiming his territory, his dark, imposing presence silencing any whispers of a sham marriage. Inside, the grand hall was transformed into an opulent wonderland of towering floral arrangements and flowing champagne. Across the room, lurking near the shadows of a massive Egyptian statue, stood Conrad and Mia. Conrad had spent his last dime bribing a low-level event coordinator to get them off the wait list. He was sweating through his rented tuxedo, his eyes darting desperately around the room, hunting for potential donors. Mia stood beside him, shivering. She was wearing a dress she had practically stolen from a sample sale. Her hair hastily pinned up, her bruised wrist was hidden beneath a cheap silk glove. "There's the CEO of Vanguard," Conrad muttered, his eyes locking onto a silver-haired man across the hall. "Stay here. Do not speak to anyone. Do not embarrass me." He practically shoved Mia into the shadows before marching toward his target. Mia gripped her empty glass, her chest tight with a suffocating mix of humiliation and rage. She watched as Elena glided through the room, effortlessly commanding the attention of senators and billionaires alike. Damien stood by her side, completely devoted, hanging on to her every word. It's not fair, Mia thought, her mind twisting with toxic entitlement. She stole my life. She stole my billionaire. A dangerous, venomous idea began to form in Mia's mind. If she could expose Elena as a fraud, a cheat, a scandal, Damien's pride wouldn't allow him to stay married to her. The Sinclair family would throw Elena out, and Mia could swoop in to comfort the grieving billionaire. Mia's eyes darted toward the VIP lounge entrance. She saw a waiter carrying a tray of signature cocktails meant exclusively for the Sinclair table. With trembling hands, Mia dug into her clutch and pulled out a small, unmarked vial. It was a heavy sedative she had stolen from Conrad's mother's medicine cabinet, enough to make someone completely lose control of their motor functions and collapse in a humiliating, incoherent mess. She slipped through the crowd, her eyes locked on the waiter. "I am going to destroy you, Elena," Mia thought, a manic smile stretching across her face as she uncapped the vial. Right in front of the whole world, the air in the Metropolitan Museum was thick with the scent of old money and ruthless ambition. From her vantage point on the sweeping marble staircase, Elena watched the ballroom floor with the predatory stillness of a hawk. Beside her, Damien stood with his hands casually in his pockets, though his eyes mirrored her calculated vigilance. 3 o'clock, Damien murmured, his voice a low rumble over the ambient hum of the string quartet. By the ice sculpture. Elena didn't need to turn her head. She had been tracking Mia for the last 10 minutes. Hidden in the shadows of a towering floral arrangement, Mia was speaking frantically to a tall, dangerously handsome man wearing a staff uniform that didn't quite fit his broad shoulders. He wasn't a waiter. He was a high-end escort, the kind hired for private, unrecorded favors in the dark corners of Manhattan. Elite parties. Mia shoved a thick envelope of cash into the man's chest. Elena could read Mia's lips perfectly, the woman in black. "When the drug hits, take her to VIP Suite 4. Leave the door open." The man smirked, pocketed the cash, and melted into the crowd. Next, Mia intercepted a passing waiter carrying a silver tray of Sinclair-branded champagne flutes. With her back turned to the room, she fumbled with her clutch. A small vial appeared in her hand. Lorazepam, Elena noted internally, recognizing the white powder instantly from her years, managing Agnes Vance's medical care. At least 2 crushed pills, enough to cause severe ataxia, slurred speech, and total loss of inhibition within 15 minutes. She wants me crawling on the floor like an animal. She just spiked a glass, Damien said, his jaw tightening, a lethal protective instinct flaring in his chest. He took a step forward. I'll have security drag her out by her hair. No! Elena caught his arm, her grip firm and icy, getting thrown out as a mercy. I don't deal in mercy, Damien. I deal in absolute ruin. A chilling, brilliant smile touched Elena's lips. She let go of Damien's arm and began a slow, deliberate descent down the marble staircase and tell the AV control room to get ready. Down on the floor, Mia's heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She watched the waiter walk away with the spiked flute, heading straight for the staircase where Elena had just been standing. It as done, Mia thought, a hysterical, venomous thrill shooting through her veins. In 20 minutes, the tabloid reporters I tipped off will burst into Suite 4. Elena will be a drug-disgraced mess, on top of a male escort. Damien will divorce her tomorrow. Mia! The harsh hiss of Conrad's voice made Mia jump out of her skin. Conrad stormed over, his face flushed with the desperate sweat of a failing man. Standing right behind him was Richard Sterling, the billionaire CEO of Vanguard Holdings, Conrad's absolute last hope for campaign salvation. Mr. Sterling, Conrad forced a sickeningly smooth smile, gesturing to Mia. This is my wife, Mia. As I was saying, our campaign is built on traditional family values and absolute transparency. Sterling, a shrewd man with cold, judging eyes, looked Mia up and down, clearly unimpressed by her cheap dress and frantic demeanor. Is that so? In my experience, politicians who preach family values are usually hiding the biggest skeletons. Not us, sir. Conrad laughed nervously, a bead of sweat dripping down his temple. We have nothing to hide. How refreshing! The soft, melodic voice sliced through the tension, like a scalpel. Conrad froze. Sterling turned. Mia felt the blood drain entirely from her face. Elena glided into their circle. She held 2 crystal champagne flutes in her hands. One was standard, the other had a faint, almost invisible ring of white residue near the rim. Mr. Sterling, Elena offered a graceful nod. A pleasure to see you again. I reviewed your firm's quarterly healthcare investments this morning. Brilliant maneuvering. Sterling's cold eyes instantly lit up with profound respect. Mrs. Sinclair, the brilliance was yours. Your restructuring of the Sinclair portfolio sent shockwaves through Wall Street. I was hoping to get a moment with you tonight. Of course. Elena smiled warmly. Before turning her gaze to Conrad and Mia, the warmth vanished, replaced by an icy, suffocating pressure. But first, I simply must toast my brother-in-law and his lovely wife. Elena extended her hands, offering the 2 glasses. She handed the clean glass to Conrad. Then she held out the spiked glass to Mia. Oh, the absolute dark poetry of this moment. Mia literally brought the poison, and Elena just played the polite high society hostess. This is top-tier feminine warfare. You don't need to scream or throw hands like a reality television star. And Conrad forcing his own wife to drink it to save his networking opportunity. Chef's kiss. That's what happens when you hitch your wagon to a narcissistic opportunist. Mia stared at the glass as if it were a live grenade. Her breath hitched. She recognized the faint smudge on the crystal. It was the glass she had just poisoned. Take it, Mia, Elena said, her voice dripping with sweet, lethal poison. To family. This was his only chance at funding, and his useless wife was refusing a basic high society courtesy from the most powerful woman in the room. Mia. Conrad's voice dropped to a terrifying, guttural whisper that only she could hear. Take the damn glass. I really can't, Mia stammered, tears of sheer panic welling in her eyes. If she drank it, she would be paralyzed in minutes. Is there a problem, Conrad? Elena asked innocently, tilting her head. Perhaps your wife doesn't wish to associate with the Sinclair family, or perhaps she knows something about this champagne that we don't. Conrad's face turned purple with rage. He snatched the glass from Elena's hand and practically shoved it against Mia's chest. Drink it, Conrad commanded, his fingers digging sadistically into her bruised wrist, hidden by the silk glove. Stop embarrassing me in front of Mr. Sterling. Drink it right now, or I swear to God, I will leave you on the street tonight. Mia looked at Conrad's murderous eyes. She looked at Sterling's judgmental frown. And finally, she looked at Elena. Elena wasn't smiling anymore. She was staring at Mia with the cold, dead eyes of an executioner, watching the guillotine drop, sobbing quietly, her hands trembling so violently the champagne sloshed over the rim. Mia brought the glass to her lips. She closed her eyes and swallowed the bitter, tainted liquid. Wonderful, Elena whispered, stepping back. Enjoy the rest of your evening, Mia. I have a feeling it's going to be unforgettable. Elena turned and walked away, leaving Mia suffocating in her own trap. 10 minutes later, the heat in the ballroom felt unbearable. Mia's vision blurred, the grand chandeliers smearing into streaks of blinding light. The lorazepam was hitting her bloodstream like a freight train. Conrad, she slurred, reaching out blindly. I need to sit. Jet off me. Conrad hissed, shaking her hand away in disgust. He was busy trying to corner another donor. Go to the bathroom. You look like a drunk. Mia stumbled backward, the world spinning violently. She tried to walk toward the exit, but her knees buckled. Before she could hit the marble floor, a pair of strong arms caught her. Whoa, there! Beautiful! A deep voice chuckled. Mia blinked heavily, trying to focus. It was the escort she had hired. Tristan. Number. Mia mumbled, her tongue heavy and useless. Not me, her. Shh. I got you, Tristan said, completely misinterpreting her slurred words. He had been paid to take a brunette thorn woman who was struggling to walk up to VIP Suite 4. He didn't care which one it was. He just wanted the rest of his payout from the tabloid reporters waiting upstairs. Tristan scooped Mia up, supporting her weight as he dragged her toward the private elevators. High above the ballroom, in the AV control booth, Damien stood behind the terrified museum technician. Damien's hand rested heavily on the man's shoulder. When my wife gives the signal, Damien said, his voice a dark, velvety threat, you switch the main ballroom projectors to the security feed of VIP Suite 4. Do you understand? The technician swallowed hard, nodding frantically. Down in the grand hall, the museum director tapped his microphone, signaling the start of the charity auction. The room of 500 elites fell silent, turning their attention to the massive digital screens flanking the stage. Conrad stood near the front, adjusting his tie, ready to bid on a cheap item, just to get his name called. Elena stood perfectly still at the back of the room. She raised her glass of champagne, her eyes locking onto the camera in the corner of the room. She took a sip, the signal. The museum director smiled brightly. Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin the bidding, please direct your attention to the screens for a special presentation on the importance of transparency and integrity. The massive screens flickered, but it wasn't a charity video. The high-definition security feed of VIP Suite 4 illuminated the entire ballroom. A collective gasp ripped through the crowd. Someone dropped a glass. It shattered loudly against the marble. On the 50-foot screens, in crisp, undeniable clarity, was Mia. Her dress was half unzipped, slipping off her shoulders as she writhed incoherently. On the velvet sofa, looming over her, aggressively kissing her neck and unbuckling his own belt, was the male escort. Number, Conrad whispered, all the blood draining from his face as he stared at the screen. The entire room turned to look at him. 500 of New York's most powerful people, watching the family values politician's wife star in a live drug-fueled scandal. Elena stood in the shadows, her face bathed in the blue light of the screens, watching Conrad's political empire disintegrate into ash. Checkmate. The silence in the Metropolitan Museum ballroom was absolute, broken only by the horrifying, amplified audio feeding directly from VIP Suite 4. Come on, baby, you paid for the full hour. The escort's voice echoed through the grand hall, accompanied by the rustle of clothing and Mia's incoherent, drug-laced moans. For 3 agonizing seconds, the elite of New York City were paralyzed by the sheer audacity of the scandal playing out on the 50-foot screens. Then, the chaos erupted. "Turn it off!" Conrad screamed, his voice cracking with a hysterical, guttural panic. He lunged toward the stage, knocking over a tray of champagne flutes that shattered into 100 pieces. "Cut the feed. Turn it off right now." But the AV technician, terrified by the billionaire standing over his shoulder in the control booth, didn't touch a single button. Flashbulbs began to explode like a strobe light. The tabloid reporters Mia had tipped off, expecting to ruin Elena, were now frantically snapping photos of the screens and of Conrad's horrifying public meltdown. Mr. Vance, Richard Sterling, the Vanguard CEO, stepped back from Conrad as if he were carrying the plague. His face was twisted in profound disgust. "Is this your definition of family values? A drug-fueled affair at a charity gala?" No, Mr. Sterling, please," Conrad begged, grabbing the billionaire's sleeve. "She was set up. It's a deep fake. It's not real." Sterling violently yanked his arm away. "Do not ever contact my office again. You are finished in this city, Vance." Conrad stood frozen, his chest heaving as the political donors, the socialites, and the media moguls all physically backed away from him. He was a pariah, a walking corpse. Up in Suite 4, the heavy oak doors suddenly burst open. 3 museum security guards, tipped off by Damien, rushed in. They ripped the escort off the sofa and pinned him to the floor. The live feed cut to black, but the damage was irreversible. Elena remained standing near the back of the room, her expression an impenetrable mask of serene indifference. She took a slow sip of her champagne, the crisp bubbles a perfect contrast to the burning wreckage of her sister's life. Damien appeared beside her, slipping out from a side corridor. He didn't say a word. He simply wrapped a heavy, protective arm around her waist, pulling her flush against his side. His dark eyes scanned the room, silently daring anyone to approach his wife. "She brought the poison," Elena whispered, not looking at Damien. Her eyes fixed on Conrad, trembling back. "She hired the escort," she called the press. "All I did was hand her the glass she poured." "I know," Damien murmured, his lips brushing against her temple. "You didn't ruin her, Elena. You just let her look in the mirror." Across the room, Conrad suddenly snapped out of his shock, his face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated violence. He didn't care about the cameras anymore. He didn't care about his image. He only cared about the absolute destruction of his ego. He turned and sprinted toward the private elevators. "He is going up to the suite," Damien noted, his muscles tensing. "Do you want me to have security intercept him?" "No," Elena replied, her voice dropping to a glacial chill. "Let him see her. Let him feel exactly what it's like to have the life you built ripped away by someone you are chained to." 10 minutes later, the back alley of the Metropolitan Museum. The flashing red and blue lights of an ambulance painted the brick walls in a chaotic rhythm. Mia was strapped to a gurney, her head lolling to the side, completely incapacitated by the heavy dose of lorazepam. Her cheap dress was torn, her makeup smeared down her face like a grotesque clown mask. Conrad stood by the ambulance doors, flanked by 2 NYPD officers. His tuxedo was completely drenched in sweat, his hands shaking violently as he stared at his wife. "Sir, we need to take her to Mount Sinai for toxicology," the paramedic said, adjusting Mia's fourth drip. "She has a dangerous amount of sedatives in her system." Conrad didn't answer. He just stared at Mia's bruised wrist, the wrist where the Cartier bracelet had been just days ago. She ruined me, Conrad thought, the realization ringing in his ears like a gunshot. 10 years of military service, 5 years of local campaigning, the Vanguard endorsement, all of it, gone because of this stupid, greedy parasite. Just as the paramedics were about to close the ambulance doors, the sharp, rhythmic click of expensive heels echoed down the alleyway. Conrad turned, his bloodshot eyes narrowing. Elena walked out of the museum's service exit, draped in Damien's heavy suit jacket, to ward off the chill. Damien walked half a step behind her, a silent, lethal shadow. Conrad's breath hitched. He looked at Elena's flawless posture, the breathtaking emeralds around her neck, and the absolute power radiating from the billionaire at her side. In that split second, the memories of his past life violently crashed into his mind. He remembered Elena staying up until 3 a.m. writing his speeches. He remembered Elena charming the governor at a private dinner to secure his first major endorsement. He remembered Elena quietly, ruthlessly destroying his political rivals behind the scenes. It was never me, Conrad realized, a sickening wave of nausea hitting his stomach. She was. I traded the architect of my empire for a cheap, useless imitation. Elena, Conrad croaked, taking a desperate step toward her. The police officers immediately tensed, but Damien stepped smoothly in front of Elena, his hand slipping inside his jacket. "Take another step, Vance." Damien's voice was a low, terrifying growl. "And you won't need an ambulance. You'll need a morgue." Conrad froze, raising his hand submissively. "Elena, please. You have to tell the press this was a setup. You have the Sinclair PR machine. You can spin this. We're family." Elena stepped around Damien, stopping just out of Conrad's reach. She looked at the pathetic, broken man begging at her feet. This was the man who had ordered her to scrub his mother's vomit, the man who had handed her life's work to Mia without a second thought. "Family?" Elena tilted her head, her voice devoid of any human warmth. "My family is standing behind me, Conrad. You are just a bankrupt man with a drug-addicted wife and a dying campaign." Conrad's face twisted in agony. You knew she was going to do this. You planned it." "I didn't plan anything, Conrad," Elena said softly, stepping closer. Her voice meant only for him. "I simply stopped carrying your dead weight. This is who you are without me, a failure, a joke, a man who couldn't even control his own wife." Conrad let out a strangled, animalistic sob. Elena didn't blink. She turned away from him, slipping her hand into Damien's cess. "Let's go home, Damien," she said, her voice clear and commanding. "The air back here smells like garbage." Behind them, the ambulance doors slammed shut, trapping Mia inside her chemical prison, while Conrad remained kneeling in the alley, screaming into the void of his shattered reality. But Elena knew this wasn't the end. Conrad was a cornered animal, and cornered animals always bite the hand closest to them. Tomorrow, the final implosion would begin. The morning after the Met Gala, New York City woke up to a media bloodbath. Every tabloid, every major news network, and every political blog had the same image plastered across their front pages. Mia Vance, half undressed on the VIP suite sofa, beneath the blaring headline, "Family Values in the Gutter." Senate hopeful's wife caught in drug-fueled escort scandal. Inside the Vance townhouse in Queens, the air was suffocating, smelling faintly of stale alcohol, urine, and absolute despair. Conrad sat at the kitchen table, his phone buzzing incessantly with notifications. Campaign manager, I quit. Donald, list A. Funds withdrawn. State party chairman, drop out by noon, or we publicly disavow you. Conrad didn't read them. Valerie Thorne, Mia's mother, had arrived an hour ago, storming into the house after seeing the morning news. She was currently in the master bedroom, screaming at her daughter. You stupid, worthless girl. Valerie's shrill voice echoed down the stairs. I told you to marry the Sinclair heir. But no, you had to play psychic. You said Conrad was going to be a senator. Look at this. You've ruined the Thorne name. In the bedroom, Mia was huddled in the corner of the bed, shivering uncontrollably. The hospital had pumped her stomach and discharged her at dawn. She felt hollowed out, her brain still foggy from the sedatives. Mom, please, Mia sobbed, clutching the blankets to her chest. It was Elena. She spiked my drink. She set me up. We have to sue her. Valerie slapped her. Hard, the sharp crack echoed through the room. Mia gasped, holding her stinging cheek. Sue Elena? Valerie shrieked, her face purple with rage. With what money? Elena controls the Sinclair legal team. They would crush us in a day. You did this to yourself, Mia. You couldn't even handle a simple charity gala without acting like a cheap hooker. I didn't! Mia screamed back, completely losing her mind. I was supposed to be the senator's wife. I was supposed to have the power. It's mine. It's all mine. Downstairs, Conrad finally moved. He slowly stood up from the kitchen table. He walked over to the drawer near the sink, the one where they kept the heavy, cast iron meat tenderizer. He didn't pick it up. Instead, his eyes drifted to the cabinet where he kept his old military service weapon. No, Conrad thought, a dark, terrifying clarity washing over him. Guns make noise. Guns bring the police too fast. He walked to the hallway closet and pulled out his heavy steel-toed combat boots. He slipped them on, lacing them up with meticulous, terrifying precision. He had lost everything. His career, his reputation, his future, and the two women screaming upstairs were the anchors that had dragged him to the bottom of the ocean. Conrad began to walk up the stairs. Each heavy footstep sounded like a death knell in the quiet house. In the bedroom, Valerie was still screaming. I am cutting you off, Mia. I am legally disowning you. You are staying in this filthy house with this bankrupt loser, and you will never. The bedroom door swung open. Valerie froze. Mia stopped crying. Conrad stood in the doorway. His face was completely blank. No anger, no sadness, just the terrifying, dead stare of a predator that had finally snapped. Conrad. Valerie sneered, trying to mask her sudden fear with upper-class arrogance. You can keep this useless. Conrad didn't say a word. He stepped forward and drove his fist directly into Valerie's face. The crunch of cartilage was sickeningly loud. Valerie was thrown backward, crashing into the mirrored vanity. The glass shattered, raining down on her as she collapsed to the floor, completely unconscious. Mom! Mia shrieked, scrambling backward on the bed until her back hit the headboard. Conrad, what are you doing? Stop! Conrad slowly turned his head toward Mia. He cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing in the small, suffocating room. You told me you were my lucky charm, Conrad whispered, his voice devoid of all humanity. You told me you would bring me power, but all you did was steal my money, murder my campaign, and humiliate me in front of the entire world. He lunged onto the bed. Mia screamed as Conrad's hands wrapped around her throat, pinning her down. You want to be a politician's wife? Conrad spat, his grip tightening, cutting off her air supply. This is what happens behind closed doors, Mia. This is the real world. 30 miles away, in the serene, sunlit breakfast room of the Sinclair estate in the Hamptons, Elena sat at the table, sipping her black coffee, the morning edition of the Wall Street Journal, resting perfectly pressed beside her plate. Damien walked into the room, already dressed in a sharp navy suit. He didn't sit down. He walked directly behind Elena, leaning down to press a soft kiss to the crown of her head. "My security team just intercepted an emergency police scanner transmission," Damien said, his voice low and serious. "Units were dispatched to Queens, the Vance residence." Elena didn't flinch. She took another slow sip of her coffee. "And a neighbor called 911 after hearing screaming and glass breaking," Damien continued, his eyes watching her reflection in the window. "When the police arrived, they found Valerie Thorne unconscious with severe facial trauma. Mia Vance was found on the floor, barely breathing, with a shattered collarbone and a fractured skull." Elena carefully set her coffee cup down on the saucer. The porcelain clinked softly in the quiet room. "And Conrad? Arrested on the front lawn," Damien replied. "He didn't even try to run. The police said he was just sitting on the grass, staring at his hands. He's being charged with 2 counts of attempted murder. Given the high-profile nature of the scandal yesterday, he'll never see the outside of a prison cell again." The room fell silent. The agonizing 10 years of Elena's past life, the endless scrubbing, the verbal abuse, the political maneuvering, the suffocating water of the Atlantic Ocean, finally evaporated into the morning air. It was over. The parasite was locked in a cage, and the venomous snake had its fangs ripped out. Elena slowly stood up. She turned to face Damien, for the first time since she woke up in that velvet armchair. The icy, impenetrable wall around her heart cracked. She looked at the billionaire who had surrendered his arrogance for her, the man who had stood beside her as she burned her enemies to the ground. "Damien," Elena whispered, her voice finally softening. Damien reached out, gently cupping her face. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "You are safe now, Elena. The ghosts are dead." Elena leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. "They aren't ghosts anymore. They're just inmates." She opened her eyes, the sharp, brilliant fire returning to her gaze. "Cancel my afternoon meetings," Elena said, a slow, breathtaking smile spreading across her face. "I need to pick out an outfit. We have a hospital to visit." 3 years later, Elena stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass, wearing a crisp white blazer, her reflection superimposed over the empire she now co-ruled. In just 36 months, she had transformed the Sinclair Corporation from a stagnant real estate holding company into a global titan of healthcare and urban development. The heavy mahogany doors opened. Damien walked in, exuding the predatory grace of a man who owned the world and bowed only to the woman in front of him. "The helicopter is waiting on the roof," Damien said, checking his watch. "We ring the NASDAQ opening bell. In exactly 2 hours, the IPO for your new trauma center network is oversubscribed by 3%. Elena turned, a cool, satisfied smile touching her lips. "Good. But we have one stop to make before Wall Street." Damien's eyes darkened with understanding. He didn't question her. He simply nodded, offering his arm. The air inside the Rockland State Psychiatric Facility smelled of bleach, boiled cabbage, and forgotten lives. It was a stark, jarring contrast to the cedarwood and champagne of the world Elena now inhabited. A tired nurse unlocked the heavy steel door to the high-security ward. "She's having one of her gala days," the nurse muttered, not looking up from her clipboard. "Don't get too close. She bites when she thinks people are stealing her jewelry." Elena stepped into the sterile, fluorescent-lit recreation room. Damien stood right behind her, a silent, imposing wall of protection. Sitting in a plastic chair in the corner, staring blankly at a television playing static, was Mia. She was unrecognizable. The glamorous, arrogant girl from the yacht was gone. Her hair was a matted, lifeless tangle, a jagged, permanent scar cut across her collarbone, a parting gift from Conrad's violent breakdown. She was wearing a faded, standard-issue hospital gown, but her hands were elegantly poised in her lap, as if she were holding an invisible champagne flute. Elena's heels clicked against the linoleum. At the sound, Mia's head snapped up. For a second, Her hollow, sunken eyes were completely vacant. Then, a terrifying delusional spark ignited in her pupils. "Elena!" Mia gasped, her voice raspy and broken. She tried to stand, but her atrophied muscles betrayed her, and she slumped back into the plastic chair. She looked past Elena, her eyes locking onto Damien. A grotesque, desperate smile stretched across Mia's face. "You brought him!" Mia clapped her hands together like a giddy child. "Mom said we could switch. I am ready now, Elena. You can have Conrad back. He's going to Washington. You know, but I am ready to be Mrs. Sinclair. Tell Damien, I am ready." Damien's face contorted in absolute disgust. He didn't say a word. He simply pulled Elena closer, his hand resting firmly on her waist. A physical rejection of Mia's entire existence. Elena looked down at her stepsister. There was no anger left in her chest. No hatred. Only the cold, clinical observation of a parasite that had finally starved to death. "Conrad isn't going to Washington, Mia," Elena said, her voice perfectly even, slicing through the delusion with surgical precision. "Conrad is serving 40 years in a maximum security prison for attempted murder. Your mother is bankrupt, living in a studio apartment in New Jersey, drowning in legal debt." Mia's left eye twitched violently. The micro-expression of pure, trapped panic rippled across her sunken face. She shook her head, her hands flying up to cover her ears. "Liar!" Mia shrieked, her voice cracking. "You stole it. You stole my billionaire. I am the senator's wife. I have the Cartier bracelet. I have the power." Elena slowly leaned down, bringing her face level with Mia's. "You never had the power, Mia," Elena whispered, her words laced with absolute terrifying finality. "You just wanted to wear the crown I forged. You thought destiny was a lottery ticket you could steal. But destiny isn't stolen. It's built." Mia stared at Elena, her breath hitching. For one agonizing, fleeting second, the fog of insanity parted. Mia looked at Elena's immaculate clothes, the massive diamond resting on her finger, and the billionaire who looked at her like she was the only woman on earth. She hadn't just lost a game, she had thrown herself into the abyss. A guttural, animalistic sob tore from Mia's throat. She curled in on herself, rocking back and forth on the linoleum floor, crying out for a past life that never truly belonged to her. Elena didn't linger. She stood up, her posture flawless. "Let's go," Elena said, turning her back on the wreckage of the Thorne family. Damien took her hand, leading her out of the ward. As the heavy steel door slammed shut, the sound of the locking mechanism echoed with the finality of a closing coffin. 1 hour later, Times Square, Manhattan. The morning sun reflected brilliantly off the glass facades of the skyscrapers. Inside the NASDAQ broadcasting studio, the energy was electric. Hundreds of cameras were pointed at the podium. Damien stood right beside her, his fingers intertwined with hers. 10 seconds to mark it open, the floor director shouted. Damien leaned in, his lips brushing against Elena's ear over the roar of the trading floor. "You took a broken life and conquered the world with it. You are magnificent, Mrs. Sinclair." Elena looked up at him, her eyes shining with the fierce, untouchable light of a woman who had rewritten the stars. "I told you, Damien," Elena murmured, a razor-sharp smile gracing her lips. "I play to win." 3, 2, 1. Elena pressed the button. The bell rang out, a deafening, triumphant roar that echoed across Wall Street. The massive digital screens outside in Times Square flashed with her name, her face, and her empire. She wasn't a motherless stray. She wasn't a politician's stepping stone. She wasn't a victim of the Atlantic Ocean. She was Elena Sinclair, and she held the world entirely in the palm of her hand. Phew, take a deep breath, ladies. Let's unpack this. What I absolutely adore about this story is the brutal, unfiltered truth. It exposes about relationships and success. Mia was the classic gold digger who thought wife was just a job title that came with a black card, a Cartier bracelet, and endless brunches. She thought she could just hit copy-paste on Elena's past life and reap all the benefits. But here is the tea. My loves, you cannot steal someone else's hustle. Conrad wasn't a self-made king. He was a fixer-upper. Elena was the ghostwriter of his entire existence. And Damien, he wasn't the prize either. Elena was the prize. She didn't need a billionaire to save her. She just needed a partner who wouldn't get in her way. When Mia stole the safe bet, she actually volunteered for a nightmare. Why? Because a weak, incompetent man will always punish you for his own failures. Conrad didn't ruin Mia. Mia ruined Mia by thinking a man was her shortcut to the top. This story is the ultimate lesson in knowing your worth. Destiny isn't a winning lottery ticket you can snatch out of someone's hand. It's built in the trenches. If you have the brains, the grit, and the sheer audacity to back yourself up, you can turn a doomed, loveless marriage into an absolute empire. Elena didn't just survive the Atlantic Ocean, she became the storm. So, my beautiful cynics, I want to hear from you. What would you have done if you woke up in Elena's shoes? Would you have let your toxic sister walk right into that trap? Or would you have played it differently? And let us be real, how satisfying was that Met Gala scene on a scale of 1 to 10? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'll be reading them with my wine. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you love a good revenge story. Until next time, stay sharp, trust no one blindly, and always, always secure your own bag.